My name is Vane Villavicencio. I'm going to share information about classification of our world Englishes. Throughout the observed master classes, it can be concluded that the language is closely related to the culture of a country or human group. It is necessary to be aware as inhabitants of a place that there are ways to preserve original languages, that they are part of the world in each nation. Communicating with a single language does not ensure to avoid misinterpretation and poor use of the components of a language, since each language is influenced by various factors. In other words, it is constantly evolving. The more a language becomes globalized, the more it is affected by the adjustment that a speaking community needs to make in order to communicate. The adaptations becomes as varied as the conditions of a subject using the global language are diverse. That is why English presents variants in each place and ethnic group. This makes it difficult for subjects to interpret and express themselves in the same language. This is why it is important to research beforehand, to be ready and to ask questions when one is going to integrate a new speaking community or be exposed to a variant of English. It is also important to be familiar with the definitions of English to determine its classification. First of all, we have English spoken by people born in a place where this language is native, and it is referred to ENL, English Native Language. Also, it can be called L1, Language 1, or English as Mother Tongue, EMT. English as a second language, ESL, or Language 2, L2, describes that language is officially or legal status in a country or region, and this is determined primarily by its history of colonization, the political provisions on its government, the regulations of its educational system, the possibility of communicative exposure of its citizens within all their everyday environments. Finally, we have English as global language, referring to the use of international English as a tool of communication between people whose native language is not English. Business and tourism are the main areas that are related through the lingua franca, ELF. Also, we have the term EIL, which means English International Language, or English as Foreign Language, EFL. These are ways to refer to English as a global language. This topic is really interesting, and in the classification according to Kakru's model, we have three main circles. The inner circle, which refers to main five countries, USA, UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. And this is like a domain of English because they are the native speakers of this language. Also, we have the other or extended circle, which is related to the countries or regions using English as ESL, English as second language, where the English is official or it's established by the government because, as we mentioned it before, the historic related to colonization. In this case, we have India, Bangladesh, Ghana, Malaysia, and many more. And finally, we have the extended circle or expanding circle, where we have countries using English like EFL, English as foreign language, or lingua franca. So this is the huge number of countries and number of people like speakers of this language, like a purpose of communication. Here we have China as the highest percentage because of its population, and all the rest of the countries, Egypt, Indonesia, Israel, Japan, Latin America, and many more, related to the use of English as foreign language. In contrast, we have the MERS model, where we have another conception, the high percentile variety, which the world system of Englishes is American, the supercentral varieties, British English, Australian, South African, Nigerian, and Indian Englishes. Also, we have central varieties like Irish, Scottish, Standard, Jamaica, Ghanaian, Kenyan, Sri Lankan, Pakistani, New Zealand Englishes, and so on. Finally, we have the peripheral varieties like Maltese, St. Kitts, Cameroonian, Papua New Guinea Englishes. The main difference between the Cacruz model is that he has a very illustrative information determined by demographical um, classification. But the criticism part of this model is that we have a domain coming from the inner circle to determine the proper use of English in the other two circles. So it is not fair because we have to consider that each community of speakers is going to adjust every language to the customs, the traditions, and the needs that they have at using the English as a communicative tool. In this task, we have to determine the social and political implications of English over the languages are related to the expansive use of English by citizens to achieve a communicative purpose in different areas of society. For example, international business, education, technology, medicine, and scientific research, so on. As a result, English contributes to this use of native languages among the speaking communities, and they adopt it as language, so start dismissing the use of their own languages. The use of English as an international connection is really important, but it's important too for the governments to establish policies to maintain their native languages and dialects because they are part of their historical and cultural heritage. And for humanity, they represent diversity, identity, reserve, and historical knowledge. It has been very interesting for me to determine some details related to Scottish accent. It is named Scotland in the place of United Kingdom, and the number of speakers according to Scotland census in the government of United Kingdom established that more than 1.5 million people speak Scots, and 267,000 people can understand Scots but not read, write, or speak it. At home, only 1.1% of adults speak Scots. It's interesting to know about the history of this variety of English. First, there was Gaelic and the ancient language in the 7th century where Celts, Anglo-Saxons occupied Edinburgh and Germanic. This is the main influence that this variant of English has. So we have to be very clear also about some details related to lexical, syntactic, phonological, and morphology related to Scottish. For example, in lexical, we have the diminutive ending IE to express smallness. For example, in lady. Also, we have the use of how meaning why, and it's distinctive of Scottish. Why not? It is often rendered of how no. So then we are going to have a syntactic structure where we are going to have the question, what age are you instead of how old are you? Finally, we have these important examples of phonetical features in Scottish. Elongated sound of O, like foot instead of food, and should instead of should. E sounds example in settle, and yet we are going to have extended Seattle and yet. The O sound in Scottish for clothes and robot. We are going to have clothes and robot. Also for Scottish. And finally, we have for morphology this example. In the past of regular verbs, Celt is going to use ed at the end instead of the irregular form of salt. And for tell is the same. telled with ed instead of told. Thank you so much for your attention. Bye bye.